Welcome to Alter Everything, a podcast about data science and analytics culture. I'm Maddie Johansson, and I'm the team lead for multimedia content at Alteryx. For this episode, I sat down with Claire McCullough. She's a student working on her master's in accounting, an Alteryx ACE, and our 2022 Inspire America's Grand Prix winner. The Alteryx Grand Prix is a highlight of our Inspire conferences, as folks race to solve problems in Alteryx on stage and in front of a hyped-up crowd.
But as I was backstage and on the sides of the stage, I just kept going, wow, I can't believe this is really happening. And how sweet, additionally, that I won.
Claire's going to tell us all about her experience. Let's get started.
My name is Claire. I'm a student at the University of Colorado at Boulder. I'm working on my master's in accounting right now. I recently won the Alteryx 2022 America's Grand Prix, and I learned Alteryx a little less than 2 years ago.
Yeah, so I'd like to start by talking about your Alteryx journey because you packed so much learning into that 2-year period, which I think is kind of a shorter time frame that's led to the amazing highlights that you mentioned, like becoming an ACE, winning the Grand Prix this year at Inspire in Denver. So to kind of rewind and have you share with us how you became interested in Alteryx and what that learning path looked like.
Sure. I would say my interest in data analytics started my freshman year of college. So 4 years ago, I took an Excel class, and that was my first exposure to any sort of data. And I really enjoyed the structure of Excel and how I could reduce manual errors by almost automating it. It wasn't quite automation, but I loved it. And I continued working with Excel, understanding formulaic logic. And that was about the extent of my exposure until I started my undergrad information management classes my junior year. At CU, there's a class where students learn Alteryx in the context of business analytics and machine learning. So when I learned Alteryx, it clicked with the way God designed my brain. I loved it. I spent far too much time on my homework purely because I enjoyed it. And as part of the class, passing the core certification exam is actually a large part of our grade. And I actually passed it sooner than we were supposed to pass. And that was when I first realized, oh, actually I'm pretty good at this. And so I ended up studying for the advanced certification on my own time. I like to say that's how I passed my accounting finals. I used studying for the advanced exam as motivation to study for my accounting finals. I'm that much of a nerd, but I ended up passing my finals and the advanced exam. So, it worked for me. And after that, I spent a lot of time solving on the community, doing weekly challenges, and just really enjoyed engaging with other people who enjoyed Alteryx. So that was spring of 2021. I signed up for Inspire and was interested in the Grand Prix. And then right before qualifiers, I signed up pretty last minute on a whim, thought that would be a fun use of an hour, and to my surprise, I qualified and had a blast participating in last year's Grand Prix. Over last summer, I had 2 different jobs working with Alteryx. One of them is for a smaller geographic data management company called Gibis. I started as an intern, but ended up effectively being their lead Alteryx developer, helping automate a lot of their data processes with Alteryx and hire and train a now growing Alteryx team. So I'm super excited for the future of their Alteryx automation. And I also worked with a data-informed marketing company. I just had ad hoc projects for them. I was working with one of the ACEs at the time and built some API clients in Python for him. And I really enjoyed that. Both of those jobs, spent hundreds of hours doing that. And I worked through the school year as well. And then in March of 2022, this year, I was surprised and delighted to get an invitation to join the ACE program. So I joined the ACE program and have thoroughly enjoyed that the last 2 months, and knew I wanted to participate in the Grand Prix again. Although I did find out that they only let one ACE in the finals this year. So I knew I wanted to participate in the qualifiers just to see if I could make it. I could tell that my skills had drastically improved from last year. And to my surprise and delight, I found out I placed first among the aces. So I earned the ace spot. And so that was gratifying and thrilling for me to represent them at the Grand Prix and end up placing first.
So exciting. Yeah, I was in the crowd watching the final Grand Prix, like the actual Grand Prix on main stage, and it was so awesome to just hear the crowd cheering. So many people were cheering for you, Claire. It was crazy. And your parents were there, weren't they?
They were, yes. So I'm from Denver. And so it was such a joy to have my very first Inspire be in my hometown. And so the Sparks team was very generous to my parents and facilitated getting them there and letting them in.
Yeah, it was so cool. For people who weren't there in the crowd for the Grand Prix, there was a Claire fan club right in front of your podium. They had like Claire face cutouts basically on sticks that they were like waving around. It was so funny. Who made those?
Yeah, that's funny. I think the Aces had joked about it, but they actually did not do that. I knew they would not act on that, so I was actually really surprised to see them see the cutouts because I knew the Aces would not do that. It was one of my friends from college. Her name is Sierra. She is amazing and super quirky and funny. She came to Inspire. So she works full time in cybersecurity right now, but she had the opportunity to come to Inspire and she brought those cutouts.
That's so cool. Shout out to Sierra. They were definitely the talk of the Grand Prix. Everybody that I was talking to in the crowd, they were like, "Did you see those little cutouts of Claire?" It was so great. So that Grand Prix experience, like I said, I was in the crowd. It was super amazing. And you had headphones for most of the time because I believe they need to be like soundproof because the narrators that are on stage walk the audience through the problem and your problem solving and the problem solving that the other competitors are doing. And so the competitors on stage can't necessarily hear some of that commentary. I'm curious what it was like for you. Could you see, folks in the crowd? Could you hear anything? What was just like the sensory experience like being on stage?
There was a lot of sensory input, that is for sure. But I did theater for 8 years growing up. So I knew that the stage lights would be bright.
Mm-hmm.
And they were. So the stage lights were bright, probably on the upper 2/3 of my vision, up past the computer screen. Thankfully, the people in the crowd, especially the ones in the front, were on the lower third, so I could see people in the crowd if I looked out that way.
Mm-hmm.
And most of my biggest supporters were there in the front, so I could see them, which I was grateful for. The computer monitor took up most of my vision while I was in front of it, which was probably a good thing because I was anticipating getting distracted. So actually, for the 2 weeks prior to the Grand Prix, after I found out I would be in the Grand Prix, I worked on training, but also on conditioning because I usually solve workflows by myself in complete silence. I tend to work best in complete silence for some reason, and I knew that would not be the case on stage. So I had been practicing solving workflows with loud audience noises and some random surprising sound effects on a playlist. And I think that really helped hone my focus. I would say actually the most distracting part was when someone else would finish before I did, and I could hear the crowd applaud quite loudly. I knew that seconds mattered then. It was especially apparent, so I knew I had to hurry. They all had us play music in our headphones, so I was a little bit surprised to learn they were not completely noise canceling. I've never worn noise canceling headphones before, so I wasn't sure what to expect.
Sure.
But they definitely helped dim the noise significantly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. And what an interesting behind the scenes tidbit of practicing ahead of time with like audience noises. I think that's so fun and really creative way to prepare to. I'm sure next year we'll have competitors doing that too, taking a lead out of your playbook.
Yeah, I was excited to put together my playlist for the headphones. I actually decided against music with words because I find words pretty distracting.
Mm-hmm.
So my playlist consisted of the Mario Kart soundtrack.
Really?
And yes, because it's among the fastest paced music I've heard. And I grew up playing Mario Kart Wii.
Oh yeah.
So I'm familiar with that and adrenaline that causes, especially when you're racing, your sibling right next to you. Yeah, so I was listening to the Mario Kart theme songs and some really fast-paced piano music because I grew up playing piano as well. So Maple Leaf Rag, the pianist was perhaps rushing a little bit, but it was fast enough to keep my adrenaline going.
Cool. That's genius. I love the Mario Kart soundtrack. That music is so nostalgic for, I'm sure, a lot of our listeners too. That's great. Were you nervous going on stage, or did you feel like pretty confident knowing that you beat the aces and that, had been there before virtually last year for the Inspire 2021 Grand Prix?
I was more excited than anything else as I was walking onto the stage. Beating the other aces was definitely a confidence booster because two people who had won before, I beat both of them. And the aces as a whole are really excellent Alteryx users. So that was a confidence booster for sure, especially being a comparatively newer Alteryx user. And I'd heard of Matt, Kelsey, and Ben before. I actually raced in the Grand Prix last year with Kelsey and had heard of Ben. He used to be an ace. He's pretty legendary and has raced in the Grand Prix before, so I knew the competition would be pretty fierce. But I was focusing on enjoying myself because one thing that reassured me was I couldn't do worse than last year because I got fifth place last year and I was one of five this year. So I knew I'd enjoy myself even if I didn't win. And I think that's the whole point, is to enjoy yourself and show other people how you can solve an Alteryx. But as I was backstage and on the sides of the stage, I just kept going, wow, I can't believe this is really happening. And how sweet, additionally, that I won.
Totally. Yeah, no, we're so happy to have you here as an ace and just a standout community member. And it was so fun watching you on stage at the Grand Prix. And something that you said, that a bunch of things that you said stuck out to me, but I want to kind of go back to what you said in terms of the difference in skill set and like how you noticed that your skills really improved from last year's Grand Prix to this Grand Prix. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, I'm happy to. One difference is just a confidence with the different tools and knowing what kinds of tools can solve which use cases. Some of the aces, Chris and Joshua, talk about design patterns, which is just sets of tools that you are comfortable with, and in my opinion, that probably show up in the recommendations palette as well, just tools that commonly go together. And I know I've developed that comfort just with hundreds of hours of practice, doing a variety of different use cases, both solutions on the community and working in my jobs, because I was working on a variety of tasks and had time to myself to develop them.
Yeah, it just kind of goes to speak to how practice is everything. And like the more familiar you get, the more confident you feel. And the idea of design patterns is also super interesting too. And getting that hands-on experience in the community with weekly challenges, answering questions, things like that, but then also applying that to an actual role, like having it be your job and then doing a competition that's like work related and something that you feel comfortable with and you enjoy. That's a really good combination for a competition like that.
I realize not everyone has the opportunity to work in a variety of use cases at their job. And so for those people, the weekly challenges are a fantastic opportunity to practice a variety of use cases because they provide a snippet of data that you might not find in your normal use cases. You can work with a variety of kinds of data and pursue a variety of outcomes. I realize not all use cases will have one right answer like the weekly challenges often do, meaning final output. There are a variety of ways to get there, but one final output. But the Grand Prix does. So it'd be practice for the Grand Prix.
Totally. Yeah, no, that's great. And then also kind of going back to the confidence thing, when you were giving your overview of your learning experience with Alteryx in general, you mentioned learning it in class and that you realized pretty early on, I'm good at this. And just that statement of, I'm good at this, I think is something that is really powerful. And, whether it's I'm really good at running or I'm really good at math or whatever that skill is, I just think it's a great practice to be in terms of recognizing your strengths, and also for you to become course certified ahead of time, I think is exciting too. And it probably points to that you recognize that you're good at it, but we tend to like the things that we're good at too. So beyond liking it because you're good at it, what else did you like about it early on that kind of made you want to stay curious and stay motivated?
That's a great question. I first want to address having a growth mindset because I do think just saying I'm good at something can be powerful for your positivity, but it also can be a hindrance from continuing to grow. And especially the opposite, I'm bad at this, that is having a fixed mindset. So it can be more empowering to say, I've put in a lot of effort and practice to this.
Sure.
Um, but
I like that.
yes,
Yeah.
I did feel that I was good at it.
No, I think that's really interesting. That's a really good call out. And I love this little diversion too, because I think the growth mindset in particular, it's only been a couple of years, but at the same time, you went into the Grand Prix, you got fifth last year. Is that right? And then you knew that, okay, I can still get better and I can go win this thing all around. So, anyways, and then like beyond that too, actually like growing in your actual career and things like that. But I think that all ties together to having that growth mindset. You didn't just all of a sudden think that you knew everything, but you knew that there was potential.
Yeah. One other thing that struck me about when I was first learning Alteryx is how I could express creativity. I have always considered myself more of a logical person than a creative person. But when I started learning Alteryx, I realized this is a creative outlet for me. I love designing different kinds of solutions and focusing on efficiency versus what some people like to call tool golf, or
Oh,
there are a variety of strategies you can pursue in a solution, and also each person approaches it differently, and I love that.
totally. Can you tell me more about this tool golf?
Yes, you'll probably see that phrase more commonly in the weekly challenges than anywhere else, but people who are frequent Alteryx users like to see who can solve uh, the problem in the fewest number of tools. So it's like golf. Each tool is a point, and you want the fewest number of points. I will caveat this by saying sometimes the tools with the fewest points are inefficient or bypass the entire purpose of the challenge. Like a lot of times you can solve a problem by using 45 cells in a formula tool, but that defeats the purpose of efficiency and making it dynamic. So even if a problem can be solved in 4 tools instead of 1, that might be a more efficient solution. Or like the Python tool, for example, you could solve the entire challenge in the Python tool, but that defies the entire point. So it's mostly for fun and it's mostly with the weekly challenges, but that is something to think about. Once you can solve a problem, you've solved it and that's fantastic, but can you solve it better?
And this kind of leads me to my next question, too. I think you've mentioned to me before, and like on the community, I'm sure you've talked about this here and there, too, but just your learning experiences with other facets of the analytics world, or, like you've taken different angles to enrich your experience overall. So, for example, like programming languages. I'd love to hear how, like, your understanding of programming languages has helped you understand analytics overall and helped your Alteryx experience.
Yeah, that's a great question. So actually my first 2 softwares that I learned were I dabbled in Tableau and I dabbled in Power BI during the summer of 2020 because I, like most people, suddenly had nothing better to do. I would say I did not learn those very well, but that was my first exposure to the data language and working with data. But it was when I learned Alteryx that I gained a more robust understanding of the data world. And I loved having the interface, the drag and drop icons. That made it so much more understandable to me. And then the following semester, I learned Python, and I had a context for all of these tools in Python, lock and ilock and brackets on data frames, that all made sense because I knew what the data would look like underneath, thanks to my experience with Alteryx. So I was very grateful to have learned Alteryx first. I worked with SQL a whole lot. It goes hand in hand with Alteryx. And let's see, I've now worked a lot with deconstructing HTML and XML with the advanced Alteryx tools. Can't construct them, but I sure can deconstruct them. And if regex counts as a language, I've used a lot of regex. I'm now comfortable with R. I think that's about it.
And I remember from our pre call, you mentioned something about how learning Python helped you understand macros.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about that too?
Yeah. One thing that was challenging for me to learn in Alteryx prior to learning Python were macros. Because I was having a very hard time seeing how the data flowed, because when you debug a macro, you are inside it And then when you're on the outside and the macro, especially iterative macros, are looping, and that was really challenging for me to learn. So when I passed the advanced certification, I barely passed the first time. I got lucky that I passed, I think, because I really did not understand how macros worked. And suddenly, when I learned Python, for loops and while loops made so much more sense. Learning how you can loop based on a condition, and that's what the macros are doing too. There are different kinds of conditions you can evaluate, but learning those two concurrently facilitated my understanding.
That's so cool. Yeah, I love how there's just so many different angles that you've taken. And also kind of going back to your university experience, because I feel like it is something that we're starting to see more often, which is exciting. Alteryx in the classroom, because, it's just giving students a leg up. You as a really good example. But I do think that it's interesting. And I would love to talk about that a little bit more. So you're going for your master's in accounting, which is super exciting. And I want to talk to you about forensic accounting, because I know that this is something that you are going to have more experience with, and it's super cool. But my understanding is that it's more of an advanced practice, I believe. So I want to talk to you about why that is, and maybe what you added to your toolkit that opened up this door for you so early in your career.
Yeah, I've been interested in forensic accounting for 3 or 4 years. And like you mentioned, I thought, and people kept telling me this is usually a field you have to enter once you're 5 or 10 years into your career. So I said, okay, and I put it on the back burner until when I was volunteering for the Alteryx class. They bring in students, previous students, and professionals who use Alteryx to volunteer and hold office hours, and students can come ask questions. One of the professionals worked in forensic accounting at PwC. My interest was piqued, and so I went to her office hours and I chatted with her about forensics, and she connected me to other people in forensics, and I found out they use a lot of Alteryx. And so I decided to pursue forensic accounting as a career. I realized that PwC hired college students to work as interns in forensic accounting, and that's the role I have this upcoming summer. I'll be working in investigations and forensics with PwC. And in my words, from a lot of things I've heard other people say, because I took a forensic accounting class this last semester, I would describe forensic accounting partially as fraud prevention, detection, and response in companies, but there are also some valuation aspects, and just any time things need to be calculated surrounding fraud. And I should caveat all of this by saying I'm not a certified accountant. I am a student. I have upcoming work experience, but I have not worked in it yet. So everything I'm saying comes from the class that I took and things I've heard from other people.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think that still gives you such a cool perspective. And you mentioned that you connected with that PwC associate and she really piqued your interest. What about it piqued your interest? And what about that forensic accounting class has been super interesting? And do you have any tidbits from class that you can share?
I thought it was so interesting. I really enjoyed learning how accountants work closely with lawyers, and it's really digging through financial data to uncover the story. It seems that forensic accountants will deconstruct other people's work to understand what happened. Not deconstruct as in tear down, but deconstruct as look and see how it was constructed. I'm excited that for traditional accountants that they can use more and more Alteryx, but that route never really interested me.
Hmm.
I love the puzzle solving aspect of forensic accounting and just the excitement, or maybe not excitement, but interest and intrigue involved in fraud. A lot of times when a company will hire a forensic accountant, either they know fraud is occurring, but they don't know where or how much,
Hmm.
or they're trying to prevent fraud from happening.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's really interesting. And as you're saying about like deconstructing how things are working and like the work that other people have done, it totally just reminds me of the tool golf that you mentioned earlier, of just looking at how other people are solving these weekly challenges and figuring that out from just like a pure Alteryx perspective. But I could totally see that applying to just the mindset of investigation and things like that.
I'm extremely analytically minded. And I use that word because that is a word that I learned from Clifton Strengths. That's my first Clifton Strength. And I've seen that manifest in my life, and I can look at a situation and understand potential outcomes. And if I were to change one aspect, how would that impact the beginning and the end? And so I love looking at workflows and situations like this and understanding impact.
Yeah, just being really analytical in general as a person. Where else have you seen this pop up in your life?
I use pros and cons lists in every area of my life,
Oh, yeah.
even where they might not make very much sense. That seems to be the only way I can approach a problem and evaluate my favorite option. Honestly, it shows up everywhere. It sometimes makes me seem cold and calculating, so that analytical mindset can be a good thing in some scenarios, but it also can come to my detriment. So I've had to learn when to lean into that and when to lean into empathy. But it was so much fun at Inspire to be around so many people who are also at least a little bit more analytical than the average person. I thoroughly enjoyed that.
Oh, 100%. I saw Samantha Hughes, one of our old aces. She's now an Alteryx associate. She posted on LinkedIn a photo. I think you were in the photos on like the rooftop bar with all the aces. And her caption was, "When you find your people, hold on to them," or something like that. So you found your people, all of the analytical folks. That's the place to be to meet with them. But also something that you said earlier about Alteryx kind of providing the opportunity to be creative. I think that it's just cool because I've seen we've had people on the podcast, there's tons of people in the community who are maybe a little bit more creative thinkers, or I don't know if that's even the opposite of being analytical. I don't think it is a direct opposite, but I think it's just like a different way of thinking. But I think that there is something to be said about Alteryx being an option for any type of thinker. And I think it's just like a cool community to be a part of.
I completely agree.
So we touched on the Grand Prix earlier, and Libby came on stage and she mentioned something about how you were the first student to win the Grand Prix. And it is just such a cool experience as a student to go through this during this time while you're still at university. Can you share a little bit more about just what this experience means as a student and just some other really great things that you've taken away from this?
Absolutely. I'm so thrilled to represent students at the Grand Prix and just students within analytics as well. But I'm so grateful for all of the professionals who have invested in me and met with me about their careers. I've probably done almost 20 informational interviews over the last 2 years, and that has made a huge difference for me. Part of it in recognition, just getting my name out there, but also in learning about what's possible. So that has meant a lot to me. And I know there are many more students out there who probably could win the Grand Prix too if they knew about it or knew about kinds of careers in analytics. So I would love to encourage people meet with students. It can be as simple as just talking about your career and what you enjoy about it and what you wish you had done differently. But that has meant a lot to me, and I'm sure it would mean a lot to other students as well.
Thanks for listening. For more on our ACE program and to see photos of Claire's Grand Prix win, check out our show notes at community.alteryx.com/podcast. Catch you next time.